Welcome to Sculpting Utopia, a podcast exploring how we can build a better society. In this show, we'll be discussing a wide range of topics, including spirituality, art, alternative living, psychology, and much more. My name's Sonum. I'm a documentary filmmaker and a yoga teacher. I love having deep conversations, and I usually ask a lot of questions. I would like this podcast to be a fun way for me, and hopefully you as well, to explore interesting ideas and concepts with curiosity and an open mind. In today's episode, I have the immense pleasure of being joined by Eider Alfonso Ruiz Samboni, a 29-year-old Colombian shaman. Eider lives in the southwest of Colombia, in a region called Putumayo. He's part of the indigenous ethnic group, the Inga community, and comes from a family of shamans. So the premise of this podcast is how we can create a better society, looking through lots of various lenses. And in today's episode, we're looking through the lens of spirituality, and specifically from a shamanic perspective. I thought this would be a great way to start the podcast because I feel that our connection to ourselves and how we view the world or how we view our purpose in life can be very informative to how we then live through and experience and how we conduct ourselves in our daily life. I found this conversation really interesting and profound. It's filled with many nuggets of wisdom, and no matter what your religious or spiritual beliefs are, hopefully you'll be able to resonate and connect with what Eider is sharing. So without further ado, welcome Eider. It's an honor to have you on the show on our first ever episode.
My pleasure, Sonum.
I'm really looking forward to speaking with you, and thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. So to begin with, could you talk a bit about the role of the shaman in the Inga community?
Claro. El chamán es un hombre.
Bueno, sure. The shaman is a man. Okay, I would like to clarify something. For cultural reasons, the role of the medicine man has been more widely spread. But I think it's good to know that there are medicine men and also medicine women. The men are called Taita and the women are called Maimas. The role they represent, or the role of the Maimas and the Taitas, is that they are spiritual guides. They are the ones who perform the rituals, ceremonies during the solstices, dances, everything related to the ritual aspect. However, they're also guides in organized society. They can take leadership roles in social matters and make decisions that benefit the community. I think the word I could express them is that they are like doctors, philosophers, psychologists, priests, and also externally, they are leaders who represent their community to other ethnicities and even to, let's say, broader population outside the indigenous territories. So they have quite a broad role. For example, they are known for their role as healers or people who have knowledge about plants. They basically receive very deep training from childhood, and by the time they reach adolescence or adulthood, they have already accumulated an experience. Knowledge of the culture, knowledge of our culture, our ancestry, the understanding of plants, knowing how to work with them, which plants are beneficial or which plants are harmful for diseases. And they take care of healing in the community and restoring balance when there are health issues, as well as restoring environmental imbalances. It is believed that the Taitas and Maimas have a deep connection with the elements and the spirits of the earth, water, fire, and air. So they heal. They heal not only human beings, but also the place where they live, the plants, the animals. And so in order to do this, they receive extensive training within their community.
So the Taitas and the Maimas are leaders of the community as well?
Yeah, they are part of a circle of leaders responsible for maintaining spiritual and material order in the territory.
Okay. And are there also other leaders, or are they the political leaders of the community?
No, there are some leaders who are purely political, who represent their community to the state and the nation. they're called cabildos or governors. Their function is more material, focusing on economic and political aspects. The taitas and the maimas, in the context of a political organization, they would be spiritual advisors to the political guides.
Okay. And your father is a taita, is that correct?
Yeah, he is a taita. His name is Manuel Ruiz Timana, and he's currently 83 years old. He has also been working in medicine since his youth. He has dedicated his entire life to this path. Today, he continues to offer his services to the community and has some followers or disciples, if you will, who are also receiving the legacy he has built throughout his life. Because that is also important. A taita or a maima don't have many apprentices, but they do have some who are the closest ones, the ones who will ultimately be responsible for receiving that heritage and passing it on to future generations.
Okay. And you also, right? Like, when did you start your training or journey to become a taita?
Bueno, sí, yo como hijo lo empecé con él desde los 4 años. Desde los 4 años fue cuando...
Well, yeah, I began with him at the age of 4. When I was 4, my father and mother agreed that I would participate in ayahuasca ceremonies. I started at that age, and now I'm 29 years old, and during this time I have been sharing with him, receiving his instructions, and I continue to do so.
Wow. And how does it work? Can anyone in your community who wants to become a taita or a maima become one? Or do they have to be chosen? Or how does it work?
Bueno, no es cualquier persona, incluso así sea de la misma etnia indígena.
Well, not just anyone can do it, even if they are from the same indigenous ethnicity. Not everyone can become a taita or maima because there are like rules, and there's some spiritual work that one must undergo so that the elders can assess whether one truly has a potential to become a shaman. Generally, those who follow a shamanic path are usually chosen. Let's say that about 70% are chosen before birth. There's a spiritual work that the parents do even before conceiving a baby, whether a boy or a girl. They are already engaged in spiritual work to ensure that the conceived baby has the potential to become a maima or a taita. But nowadays there are like some aspects of this tradition that have changed. There are young men who start, say, at 18, 20, or even 25 years old, and they can do it. However, it is always preferred that those who succeed a taita start from a very young age.
And so what was it like for you? Could you share a bit about your experience? I mean, starting at 4 years old, like what do you remember and how has your journey been so far?
Well, my first experience of taking ayahuasca, or in this case here in Putumayo, for us in the Inga ethnicity, the word we use for jarré or ayahuasca is ambihuasca. It means the same thing as ayahuasca. The only difference is that it's in our language. For me, taking ayahuasca at a very young age has allowed me to have the ability to remember moments from my very early childhood that I otherwise would not be able to recall. Also, it has helped me understand the experiences that have happened in my life, in my family, in my surroundings, even outside the community, in the world. It has helped me understand why so many experiences happen and to see that all this is part of a process of gaining consciousness. On one hand, I feel very fortunate to have grown up in a family where both my father and mother were rooted in the shamanic and ancestral aspects, and that gave me tools. At times we tell our friends and family that being on a path with the plant of jarré or ambihuasca feels like living many lives in one. The intensity with which your spirit, your soul, experiences these moments is very strong. You feel like you are in the first grade of school, and suddenly you are catapulted to the last grade, and you have to like integrate that knowledge, that experience, those emotions. It's like doing a very intensive course of many lives in one. And I believe this amplifies a human being's mental capacity the ability to connect their inner world with their outer world and to connect with other dimensions. Because we know we are not in just 1, 2, or 3 dimensions, but in many that intersect at the same time.
So to reach the spiritual world or dimension, is it always through ayahuasca, or can you enter it in other ways as well?
It can be done. There are elders or maimas who have so much wisdom and who have experienced so much on their path that they can connect with these worlds through ayahuasca or also through meditation. They don't necessarily need, that's to say, it's not necessary that a taita or a maima can only access spiritual worlds through ayahuasca. One can reach them in a normal state without consuming any substance. Obviously, it requires more intense training of the body and mind, like the ability to order thoughts coherently and to organize experiences with a very high level of consciousness. A person who can achieve this does not need to take ayahuasca to connect with these worlds. The experience with ayahuasca amplifies the internal senses or the inner resources that we humans already carry within us to project them to a higher level of consciousness. But then we understand that it can be done in a different way. I believe that nowadays there are many practices to achieve this. It can be through yoga, tantra, meditation, entering silence. These are practices. And in this case, ayahuasca helps synchronize the nervous system, the body, the mind. But the awareness of doing this quantum leap must always be present to connect with these worlds.
And could you describe a spiritual journey that you've experienced recently? Just so that we can understand a little bit about what it's like.
Well, there's an experience that isn't so recent, from about 2 years ago. On one occasion in the territory where we live with my family, we held a ceremony with friends and family in the jungle. When I entered into the trance, I felt my body splitting apart, as if I were dying, as if my soul or spirit were disconnecting from my body. But I could see that, in that separation. It was as if I were present in both the body that was dying and as a mere observer, like being beside my body and watching what was happening as if it were a movie. After that trance, I felt as if my body, my mind were just for an instant in a state of darkness, as if the light had gone out. It was like a very scary moment, a very intense fright, but as I said, it lasted only an instant. That instant felt like it lasted for hours, because it was like feeling that my breath, my life, my heartbeat, my ability to think and reason had vanished. And you don't have any support or anything to relate this experience to. It was simply like, for a second, being almost completely disconnected from life, and then in the next moment seeing my body, but no longer in its physical form, but as a subtle body, a more spiritual body that floats in the air, filled with particles of different colored light, and finding myself outside the universe. When I say universe, I mean what we learn in academia, in school, in books about the universe up to a certain point. But for us, in our worldview, the universe is not just one. We live in a universe that we think we know, but there are infinite amount of other universes to be found. Recently, I mentioned to someone today the term multiverse represents the interconnection among countless universes, like parallel worlds where our experience as spiritual beings that are in transition to a higher consciousness. And I think the place where I was that central point where the universes meet, and you can see yourself at last as you truly are for the first time, like really, like free from your body, from your mind, free from whatever it is that separates you and isolates you from wholeness. You can simply feel yourself rather than see yourself. Like you are a spark of energy returning to an immense ocean that there are no words to describe it, but it's like connecting with the source, with what we call the origin, the source of life. It was a very, very special experience. As I said, it was intense. For me, it was an experience that helped me, amongst other things, realize the importance of the material and mental training that maimas and taitas undergo in our ancestral communities, because I think there's information or impressions that you receive when you're close to the source or when you enter it, which are too strong for our ordinary mind, like the voltage, the level of energy that you feel. Many elders, many senior guides tell us that if a person in their ordinary state accidentally reaches that state or place where they leave the known universe and connect with a place where all dimensions intersect, they are very likely to go insane, or as we say, lose their mind. And that's because the information there is different from the level of information we receive from our body and mind, which is of course very limited. So for me, it was a strong and special experience because it helped me to appreciate the importance of training in all its aspects. The type of nutrition, the ability to organize and experience coherently, the capacity to master impulses and emotions, both positive and negative. For me, it was a realization that internal and external balance is necessary to eventually face that reality, which is present, not just for titans or mimos, but for anyone willing and ready to reach those states.
Wow. And so during your journeys or your entries into the spiritual world, do you communicate with other beings, like mountains, plants, or animals?
Yeah, I have done so. On a few occasions, especially when I was younger, during my first experiences between the ages of 4 and 8, I think I was more sensitive then. And it was easier for me to be amazed by the experiences I had in ceremonies. I remember seeing many beings similar to the animals we know in our jungle: snakes, jaguars, crickets, fish, birds, macaws. But I saw them differently, maybe like how they are portrayed in some futuristic or science fiction movies. Seeing animals that surely exist somewhere on Earth in the depths of the sea, in places that haven't been explored. I had various opportunities guided by a Taita because obviously the Taita is also responsible for supporting you spiritually and materially so that you can travel to and from those realms, those worlds. I had the opportunity to observe not just animals, but also vegetation, like giant trees. But they are not made of the same material we know here. The minerals in these worlds are very different. The bark, the structure or skeleton of the animals, birds and snakes are made of a more luminous, more subtle substance than what we know here from chemistry or biology.
And do they speak to you when you go to these worlds?
They don't speak with words. The connection is more with feelings. I think that this type of experiences with these beings, also with other beings, I don't know if I would call them human beings because they are certainly not like us. But the interaction with these beings, with these worlds, isn't with articulated words. It's more about vibrations, a transmission of feelings on a mental or spiritual level. So I don't recall having heard articulated words like in our language, neither Spanish nor indigenous language, but like sounds. I think the closest thing to what they sound like is the songs that shamans use in ceremonies. In a way, if you like, that's the language most similar to ours, which they use. They communicate through mantras, chants, whispers. That is the language I would say is the most similar to what is used in these words.
And with these, so yeah, they don't use words, but they communicate through feelings or vibrations. What do you think these beings are trying to communicate to you?
They communicate a calling. It's like what you feel, it's as though somehow they are speaking to something deep within you, to your spirit. And they are making a call, like a song that evokes nostalgia, like the memory of something you've lost or forgotten. And these beings are trying to remind you, to generate in you a state of joy, bliss, and also nostalgia to awaken us. I think they're trying to recreate the memory, the nostalgia, and the possibility for us to be able to remember that this, which may just be an astral journey or a journey in a ceremony for us, is actually the call of our spiritual home. They're calling us back to our home. They're calling us home.
And from your point of view, what do you think the purpose of life is, of human life?
Human life. If you ask me at this present moment, focusing specifically on inner experiences, for me, it's to awaken. Because we think we are awake. Because we get out of bed, we do things, we move around, we affect other people, we wage war, we make peace, we work, we have jobs, we run businesses. But that doesn't mean in any way that we are awake. And this type of connection with these worlds, with the sacred plants that exist on the planet, ultimately what they show us is that the purpose of life, true life, is to awaken from a dream or a vision which we are in, which largely is not reality. It's a very small part, but it's not the reality. And to be able to reach that complete reality, to be able to live there in fullness, obviously you need to be awakened. So to answer your question, the purpose of life, what you live, what I live, what any human being lives, is for the purpose of awakening.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like quite similar to Asian philosophy, like Jainism or Hinduism or Buddhism. It sounds like really similar to reaching enlightenment. So in terms of awakening, can you awaken while still being present on this earth?
Well, before that, I want to say that awakening, of course, there are many cultures that speak or have spoken about awakening in ancient times and continue to spread that message. But awakening is not a process that happens all of a sudden. No human being has a very strong experience one day and then the next moment is awakened. Awakening is a gradual process. It's very long and arduous, and one can be awake, someone who is committed to the path, to themselves, and to their experience in this dimension. They can fully awaken, and if they choose to, they can return to the origin. Or they also have the freedom to choose to stay longer or remain longer in this dimension to guide others, which is what, for example, in the East, in the Himalayas, the yogis, those people of great wisdom, they have lived and had very deep experiences which have awakened them, and some have chosen to return to the origin, to home. But there are also others who we now call gurus or teachers, who have chosen to remain in this life, in their physical body on this earth, precisely so that these roots that they have found can be planted in the minds and spirit of other people. So yes, a man or a woman can reach a state of awakening, and if it's their will, they can stay to live on earth. I believe today there may not be many, but there are certain people who live among us who are awake, and their function or their purpose is simply to guide others, to become stimuli that continue the call for others to also awaken.
And in the Inga community, do you have an origin story or a myth about how the universe was created?
There are several myths, but most of the myths converge in an ancestral vision. For us, the idea that the first man, the first human being, is linked to... I don't know how to say this, maybe it's a sensitive topic, but we are a cosmic seed. We, the indigenous people, have inhabited this land for a long time. Our cosmic seed has been split and scattered so that we populate the earth, and that's why we have such a strong connection with the earth. But the myths... There are many myths that speak of gods, ancient fathers or primordial guardians, and they describe them as giant beings, as being with a very deep spiritual capacity, and as beings who came from the stars. So for us, in our cosmovision, the origin of man is from a seed, a cosmic seed. We are here on earth, but we do not belong to the earth, as in we've not always been here. We came from the stars. You can say from beings that live beyond Earth and our ancestors in their cosmovision. Call them the fathers of the earth, the guardians of the earth, the guardians of wisdom, the fathers of knowledge. Beings of a very elevated state of consciousness who brought us as seeds to be sown in this land, and they gave each indigenous community a purpose. In the case of the Amazonian people of this region, which is known as the lungs of the world, the purpose is to keep the air clean and to figure out a way to ensure a healthy environment while we live our experiences here on Earth. For example, in the Sierra Nevada, which is also well known, is where the Mamos and the Aruacos live. They take care of the heart of the world. So basically, each community has been trusted with caring for a part of this planet, of this giant body we call Earth. But I believe the majority of indigenous communities agree that the ancestors, the primordial fathers, have sown the seeds from outside this Earth. In fact, Sonum, there are some visions that the oldest Titans share or shared. Many of them have already returned to the spiritual world from where they came, but there are messages from them that speak of how the ayahuasca plant shows us in visions a deep connection with the universe, with lights, colors, and connection with beings that are unknown here on Earth. Because ayahuasca itself has been a gift from the divine, from the gods, from the original fathers, so that we as children, being here, don't lose contact. It's like saying if you leave your father or your mother to fulfill a mission, they give you a device, a tool, a means, a resource through which you can continue to communicate with them, regardless of the distance, regardless of the time or separation that exists. And for the peoples in the Amazon, jarré or ayahuasca is like that device, that resource given to us, so that through time we can keep that connection alive. That's why when a person receives ayahuasca in a ceremony, they connect first and foremost with themselves, with their spirit, seeing themselves in a deeper and more real way, so that they can later see or have the vision of the universe from where they truly come from. This relates a lot to what we spoke about a few minutes ago regarding the message given by these beings who don't speak, but through a song reminds us of the home from where we come. And ayahuasca was that device given to us by the fathers so that we as children can keep that spiritual connection alive with them, to always remember the path and where it leads.
And recently there's been a kind of ayahuasca tourism, right? Like many tourists come to Latin America to take the medicine, but sometimes it's not done in a, I don't know. So what's your opinion on this spiritual tourism?
I don't think it's spiritual tourism. There are many things about this that are a bit tricky, delicate to discuss, because we have to consider, for example, that among the people participating in this movement, this dynamic concerning sacred plants in Colombia, Peru, Mexico, and many other places in the world, there are people who are sincerely seeking themselves and looking for a return to their origin. But there is also a large cultural and religious influence that they have turned this search into something very folkloric, a search merely for the experience itself, but not for the awakening of consciousness. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. For instance, right here in Putumayo, in different regions, it is known that there are many taitas. The presence of ayahuasca is still strong and people come here. There are men, women, young people, and even elderly people who are generally seeking that tool that allows them to access new information that connects them with their origin. And in many cases, they manage to do it. They manage to get close to the right place at the right time and make it possible for themselves to have a spiritual awakening. Other people are simply in a search for an experience beyond the ordinary, but without the consciousness of awakening. So for me, I feel that this path or this knowledge, this wisdom of the plants, it is important to be known, but also to be valued as a spiritual resource that has been left to us by our ancestors, the fathers, for our awakening. It's not something fun like a recreational plant. It is not something that you simply go to enjoy and that's it. It requires a spiritual commitment from the person to themselves, from the person to the plant, and from the person to their evolution. Ayahuasca and any sacred plant is not something fun. It is something that should be taken seriously.
I know you have to leave soon, but in your opinion, what is the biggest problem that human beings face today on a personal level?
Biggest problem? There are many, but quickly, the biggest problem for human beings anywhere in the world is that we think we know, but we don't know. We think we are awake, but we are not awake. If we were aware of the real state we are in, we would free ourselves from a great part of that delusion of control, power, and ambition, because we would realize that in many cases, we are asleep regarding our spiritual life. But we don't accept it, because I think nobody, or almost nobody, would like to accept that they are asleep, that they have lived a long time deceived by themselves, by a system, by program patterns. It's hard to accept. However, I believe that if, for example, 1/4 of the population inhabiting this planet became aware of the state they are in, without embellishing it, without putting fancy decorations, without fantasizing about paradises. If just 1/4 of people were more conscious, the world would start to change. The situations we see, wars, violence, mistreatment, genocides, abuse, conflicts, diseases of any kind would resolve themselves. But the biggest problem is that we are asleep and we don't realize it. I mean, it's difficult for a person who is asleep and who is locked in the world in a very mental, rational vision to realize that they are asleep. It requires others, and that's why there are men and women of knowledge, the Maimas and the Taitas, in different parts of the world. But if one doesn't realize that they are asleep, it's hard to accept that I have to commit to awakening. For me, that is the problem that can summarize the other problems. The other problems or karmic situations, negative situations, they all arise from not realizing that we are asleep.
And do you think that to create a better society or a better world, it's through spirituality? Or do you think it can be done through politics, like combating inequality and things like that?
For us, for a harmonious life in this dimension, both are important. The spiritual part should be balanced in the same proportion as material life, or let's say politics, as you mentioned. The organization of nations, states, men, and societies should be balanced. Sometimes people think, and I think this is also a bit of a distortion we create, that in order to be free, in order to change the world, we must dedicate ourselves 100% to the spiritual. Go up a mountain, to a waterfall, to a temple, seclude ourselves, become ascetics or hermits. But I think it has been more than proven all over the world that dedicating oneself only to the spiritual doesn't solve the world's problems. Rather, it makes the conflict more intense because it isolates the light, it isolates the consciousness in one point, and it doesn't get to where it should reach. So for me, it's important on an individual and collective level to consciously work on oneself starting from the material. I think that as material beings, our body, our mind, our reason, what we call the rational, the logical, the material, is our raw material, but it is not all we have. So if we work 50% on the material and the other 50% on the spirit, both the spiritual will manifest in the material and the material will become something more spiritualized. For me, it's about balance. Politics, economics, science, which today has advanced a lot and is also helping to give us the tools to reach that consciousness. Everything must be balanced with the spiritual.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or share that I haven't asked you?
So to close, I would like to say to people who are on the spiritual path in their search, to those who have found it, to those who are already settled in a more conscious place in themselves, in their lives, who have a broader vision about the connection between man, nature, and spirit. Our path here on Earth, at least for now, is going through many trials that we call difficulties, obstacles, but it's also giving us the strength and resilience for what is to come. I believe that many elders in different ancient and present cultures have prophesied that humans will reach a time of peace, a time where the spiritual and the material achievements of civilization will be reflected. But before that, there will be trials at an internal level, much doubt, uncertainty, sometimes fear. But that same experience is what is pushing us to break through that barrier, like that egg, that shell. And indeed, we will have a time when what is merely a myth or a prophecy of the past, a fanciful vision of our ancestors, will be fulfilled. And our role is simply to fully surrender to the spiritual path, overcome fears, confront them, integrate them, bring together our light and our darkness, and with that, we create our own possibilities. For me, that's the message. And communication, like conscious communication with ourselves, with our real world, with the true world, is always within our reach. And we can access it by truly committing to the path, to what we call our cause, our origin, our destiny. And thank you for this space. We will also be available in the future at another time if any more conversations arise. It's always a pleasure to share this, and I hope that for you, there is always a good path for the people who are with you, who are with us, and that we can recognize them as brothers, as children of good parents who were with us, are with us, and will always be.
Perfect. And for anyone who wants to learn more and perhaps experience ayahuasca and be guided, can they visit you or your father at your place?
Yeah, of course. In fact, the project we are establishing in our place is connected to rescuing ancestral experience, and we are open to receiving people. Elena is actually one of the first who has come to have this experience, and we are definitely open. Our space is for indigenous peoples, but it is also open to both indigenous and non-indigenous people.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Very, very interesting and insightful. I've learned a lot, and your responses were very profound, intelligent, and authentic. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Sonum. It's a joy and an honor to share with you. So a strong hug from afar, and always a good path, good sense, good heart, and good spirit.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. There were many things to take away from what Eider spoke about. Some things that I wanted to highlight was what Eider said about spending equal amounts of time on the political and the spiritual. Because I find that sometimes, I'm not sure what your experiences have been, but from what I have experienced, is that a lot of people tend to concentrate on just one or the other, and both are really important. It's really, of course, I think evident and necessary to be part of this material world, as Eider was saying, and fight for our rights, stand up for people who are being mistreated, oppressed, rather than just looking inwards. Looking inwards is really important as well, but we have to do both because, I mean, if we don't hold governments or businesses, corporations to account, they're going to destroy our world, ultimately. Their interests are profit, and mainly profit, I'd say, and power. So I'm really glad that Eider articulated his opinions on that so well. I also really appreciated the fact that he didn't say that shamanism is the only way, the only path, the only right way. He acknowledged that there are many different ways to get to awaken, through meditation, for example, as well as plant medicine. In fact, I think that like all religions and all, pretty much, I would say, yeah, all religions and spiritual beliefs, they're all talking about the same thing ultimately. And it's not that one is correct and the rest are wrong. They're just different paths to get to the same point. And many spiritual people and religious people talk about this source, the source of life, the source of the universe. And they describe this experience, and it sounds very coherent. They're all talking about the same thing. I find that really fascinating. I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts, and if you have had any experiences with the source or awakening, if you'd like to share, do share on Instagram, or you can email me at sculptingutopia@gmail.com. And just more generally, I'd love to hear what you took away from Eider's interview, what you found interesting or would like to discuss in more detail. And if you're thinking of heading to Colombia and would like to visit Eider and his family and explore plant medicine with them, you can contact Eider on Instagram or by email. I'll leave his details in the episode's description. A massive thank you to Elena Manfredi for connecting us and making this conversation possible. And thank you so much to Rodrigo Goncalves de Souza Maciel for dubbing the interview into English. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're on. Share it with your friends and family, and follow me on Instagram at Sculpting Utopia. If you have the time, it'd be great if you could leave a review as well. Have a lovely rest of your day or evening, and the next episode will be released in 2 weeks' time. See you then.